We'll now dive right into the first session of the day. To help us understand Asia's progress, I would like to invite Ali Izadi-Najafabadi, Head of APAC for Bloomberg NEF, to the stage. Please join me. So for those of you who don't know Ali, he is based in Seoul, and he manages the research teams across Asia Pacific for Bloomberg NEF. The teams focus on transforming the region's economies to a cleaner, more competitive future. So for all of you who have burning questions for one of the region's leading experts, now is the time to ask them. You will find a QR code right behind me. And using that, you can submit your questions, and Ali is going to answer them live on stage. Very exciting. There you go. So submit your questions. While you think of your questions, I'm going to start with one of my own. So Ali, you know, the race to net zero is going to be won or lost in Asia. And now with the world looking for a new global climate leader, what are some of the best opportunities for Asia to actually build momentum and take the lead?
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by thanking the Climate Group for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. As we heard earlier from both Helen as well as Loshin, the path to tackling climate change relies primarily with renewable powered electrification. I may be preaching to the choir here. You're likely all practitioners in this area. If we look at scenarios for mitigating emissions, majority of the credible scenarios that have been produced, and I'm not just trying to talk up our own scenarios, but if you look at others, for example, the IEA scenarios or even some of our competitors, there is agreement that majority of the emission abatement that we're going to get is going to come from increasing renewable power and increasing the share of electrification in final energy use. And this is an area that Asia Pacific has already taken a lead. We heard impressive statistics from Helen on China. If you look at in the case of China, today, road fuel demand for oil products has already reached a peak in China, thanks to electrification of mobility. And the growth of renewable power means that while, yes, China continues to build thermal power plants, the emission intensity of China's electricity generation has fundamentally transformed over the last decade. And of course, there has been a lot of significant economic benefits for various industries that have grown around increasing the share of renewable electricity as well as electrification of final energy in China. Now, some may argue that, well, China is a very large economy, has very advanced engineering and technical workforce. But we have seen the benefits of renewables in smaller markets. Close to Singapore, Cambodia has benefited from a very successful solar auction program, which has again lowered both the cost of increasing available electricity supply in an underserved market, while also creating new economic opportunities. To address your question directly, the clear opportunity today for Asia Pacific, despite the rising challenges, and there are many, and of course, the addition of new geopolitical tensions and trade tensions makes it more complicated. All of these are true. But going back to every market, there are still significant opportunities to look at the existing energy market regulations today and identify steps that can help us accelerate the deployment of renewables and increase the economic competitiveness locally. If I may take just one additional example, hopefully we'll have some questions. Here, close to Singapore, so clean power procurement across Southeast Asia had always been difficult, with few exceptions, those being Singapore and Philippines, because of existing power market regulations. But over the last few months, we have seen substantial positive change, particularly in Vietnam, So in the case of Vietnam, finally the Direct Power Purchase Agreement scheme, the DPPA, which I think some in the room may remember had been talked about for over 7 years, has been implemented. And if you look at the way that program has been designed, it is economically competitive for some industrial and commercial customers to already proceed with it. In Malaysia also we saw improvement, but here this is where the fine print matters. And the cross program in Malaysia, unfortunately, the wheeling charges that were put in there makes it highly uneconomic. And the reason I'm picking on, some of you may consider why is he going on a very niche example, is that when we get into discussions around accelerating mitigation, a lot of times we get into very high-level topics around, well, we need lots of different technologies, we need blended finance, we need this, we need that, all of these things. And those are all true. I'm not trying to say those are not true. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit which comes down to, is your energy regulation today designed to deliver the most affordable, secure, sustainable energy system? And the answer to that question in almost everywhere is always no. There are a lot of easy things that can be done with energy market regulations, which then also addresses the question of bankability. If you go talk to any of the commercial banks today, they won't say that they don't have money to lend. They say there's some projects, particularly in Southeast Asia, that are bankable. And the reason for that is not really that the technology is expensive or risky. It's because the power market regulations today doesn't make it bankable.
Yep, we actually do have a lot of questions on power market regulations. So yeah, thanks a lot for your excellent insights there. I'm going to turn to a few questions coming in. Right on top, we have competition in energy markets is vital to deploy cost-effective renewable energy. And do you see Asia's energy markets deregulating to allow for competition? Which one's first?
Yeah, so to be fair, we've already seen great progress. Singapore itself is a great example. We've got the expert with us today, Loshin. Singapore did undertake fundamental power market reforms, and they did deliver economic benefits, and that's a really good example. We've also seen Japan do another round of power market reforms post the unfortunate March 11, 2011 disaster, and again, that enabled some improvements. Vietnam also is undertaking energy market reforms that are helping. There are a lot of lessons that can be learned from across the world. Again, Loshin mentioned this earlier as well. If you look at the European countries being ahead when it comes to energy transition, part of that dates to what is called the EU Third Energy Package, which what it requires at its core is that you want to unbundle generation and retail from grid management. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that there's a lot of competition when it comes to electricity generation and retail. These are areas where you want competition. Whereas on the other hand, grids, they're natural monopolies, so you have to be very careful how you support that. These are areas that, again, you do want to allow private investment. And going back to the case of Vietnam, under the DPPA, it was very refreshing to see that Vietnam is actually going to allow private direct construction and investment of transmission, which, by the way, even in some of the OECD markets here in Asia Pacific, such as Japan today, is not allowed. In this case, Vietnam is going beyond what the Japanese allow today. So there are lots of examples, and in the interest of time, I won't try to bore you with all the details. What I do want to highlight there is the fine print does matter. Sometimes we get into sort of philosophical debates around, are auctions good? Are auctions bad? Is a capacity market good? Is a capacity market bad? What I want to say is that all these concepts can work if you design them very well with clear objectives in mind, and also realization that for the incumbent players, there will be challenges. So you have to acknowledge that, and you have to be able to come up with ways that you can help them transition as well. We're in a region where majority of the electricity system today is still being served by vertically integrated, primarily state-owned monopolies. That's not just in emerging Asia. Korea, where I'm based, is the same. Taiwan is the same. And these companies, to be fair, they provide a vital service. They need to have a viable future as well. And to do this, it's not fair to sort of burden them with lots of competing priorities. If you ask them to, for example, okay, keep your retail power prices really, really low because I'm concerned for political reasons. I don't want to have people being concerned with electricity prices rising. But then, by the way, you have to sort of fund more grid development and also connect a lot of renewable IPPs. How are they going to do that? Mm-hmm. They won't be able to do that because they're not getting the revenues to fund the investment programs that you're asking them. And by the way, when your commodity prices went up, or you lost $20 billion per your electric power company, that's unfortunate. So we'll try to figure out some way. And then what happens is usually they end up actually bailing them out through tax funding, which means the general consumer doesn't realize that they're paying for that higher electricity price, but they're paying it indirectly. Whereas if they realize that actually the cost of fossil fuel generation is higher, then they would be more supportive of also accelerating the transition.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for the questions. Please keep them coming, though we're running out of time as well. I'm going to touch on the ASEAN power grid, which has been in the making for decades now. Sorry, Mr. Low. What do you think the barriers are right now, and what needs to change to make that happen faster?
So the good news, as Loshin highlighted, we are in a different era in the sense that you already have a lot of existing bilateral infrastructure built already. Mm-hmm. So it's not like 30 years ago where this was all theoretical. Today, Vietnam already has a lot of strong links with Laos. You have the largest onshore wind farm in the region going online this year, which is delivering electrons, again, from Laos to Vietnam. Thailand, again, has interconnections that have been operating for many years. And of course, Singapore and Malaysia have had a link, although it's a relatively small one today. So the good news is that there is existing infrastructure that has been working and showing that it can work. And what the EMA has done with actually putting the RFPs out for firm clean power imports has catalyzed more momentum for the build-out of the ASEAN power grid. The biggest challenge, again, is not technology, it's not finance, it's really agreement by the governments around the market structure, the settlements, how do we tackle this? But there are solutions here as well. So the European power grid was also not built overnight. Mm-hmm. We should remember that the European countries are the ones that actually fought 2 world wars in the last century. And despite a lot of mistrust at the time, they still managed to build this up over time. So there's lessons that I think Southeast Asia can learn around how the Europeans overcome the governance challenges around interconnections. And I would highly recommend trying to learn from those lessons directly rather than trying to just learn from them by doing it and repeating the mistakes that the Europeans made a long time ago.
Okay, we have time for one last question. So what's your take on the role of hydrogen and ammonia co-firing technology in the energy transition story in APAC?
So hydrogen, to not overstate the obvious, has gone through a hype cycle. It is indeed a versatile molecule, but it also has a fundamental challenge with low volumetric energy density. What that means, given that we have very few seconds left, is that the idea that we're going to be able to replicate the energy value chain that today exists with seaborne transports of fossil fuels with hydrogen is not going to happen. The reason I went right directly on this point is this is the topic that gets discussed a lot here in Asia Pacific. We can rely on seaborne transport of coal and LNG and oil because these are commodities that are very easy to transport, particularly from an energy content basis. Transporting hydrogen, whether you do it as liquefied hydrogen or ammonia or liquid organic hydrogen carriers for seaborne shipment, will always be very extremely expensive. That means for every economy that cannot produce hydrogen locally, you want to minimize the amount that your transition is going to depend on hydrogen. And direct electrification, whenever you can do that, is the most efficient economic approach.
Thank you. That's all the time we have, unfortunately, right now. But thank you very much for your questions, and thanks for taking the time to share your expertise, Ali.